With less than a week to go until Election Day, one region of the country remains a tight race between the Liberals and the Conservatives and a smattering of NDP. In British Columbia, the CBC's poll tracker currently has the Liberals at 43.2%, with the Conservatives close behind at 38.8%. The NDP is only at 13.1%, and the Greens all the way back at just over 3% in the province. The main party leaders have all visited the province throughout the campaign. They'll be there again, trying to pitch their messages to voters.
It is fantastic to be back on Vancouver Island. As some of you know, I have family here.
So the question for British Columbians is, after a lost Liberal decade of skyrocketing costs and crime, can you afford a fourth Liberal term? Or is it time for a change?
Here in BC, you have an incredibly important role to play in this election. You can make the difference between Mark Carney getting a supermajority or sending enough New Democrats to Ottawa so we can fight to defend the things you care about.
Okay, to further break down how these messages are landing with voters in the province is our panel of BC political journalists. Rob Shaw is a political correspondent with Check News. Justine Hunter is a BC politics reporter with the Globe and Mail. And Katie DeRosa is the BC provincial affairs reporter for the CBC, a little-known outlet you may have heard of. Okay, Justine, I want to start with you. Let's look at the top-line numbers. It's this narrow lead for the Liberals in the province. What's your assessment of where things stand going into the final days of this campaign?
Well, I think because we have the potential for three-way races in some unusual ways, it would be really hard to predict the outcome at this point. But, you know, the BC in the last election divided the province so neatly between the three main parties here. We have basically 1/3 Liberals, 1/3 Conservatives, 1/3 NDP, and 1 Green, just for good measure. So I think we're going to see some big upsets, especially if these polling numbers around the NDP hold. You can just see the Liberals and the Conservatives have been sort of gathering around trying to figure out which NDP seats they can pick off.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic. So look, I'm going to get up and we're going to bring up the map just to show the color and just to show, look, the big picture. You know, Justine's right. You've got a lot of orange and blue. You get into the greater Vancouver area, it's a lot of red and orange, and you get over to Vancouver Island, which is the most mystifying place in Canadian politics, and I say that with great affection. You got some green and orange, and that is all kind of set to change potentially depending on how this goes. So Rob, let's start with you. You want to talk about northern British Columbia. Because early in the campaign, you know, Pierre Poilievre was there. He visited the NDP-held riding of Skeena-Bulkley Valley. This was Nathan Cullen's seat. It's Taylor Bacharach's seat. They've got Ellis Ross running there. What's your thoughts on what's happening in the north?
Yeah, well, Pierre Poilievre has put a lot of emphasis on areas like this. He has most of outside of Metro Vancouver and the island kind of locked up. Of those 10 ridings, 8 are Conservative, 2 are New Democrat. Boundaries Similkameen, or the Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, I think it's called. The riding borders have changed, and that's a much closer Conservative race there. The Conservatives feel like they can take that riding from the NDP and take Skeena-Bulkley Valley. So they're looking at trying to have all 10 ridings outside of Metro Vancouver, plus come down the North Island into the middle of the island and pick up 3-4 more ridings there, and then pick up some ridings in Metro Vancouver. They're very bullish, and that's why Poilievre has spent, I think, 19 visits there since he became leader, 3 so far in the campaign, and he's targeting the working class, blue-collar, hard hat-wearing former New Democrat workers and voters in those resource industries.
Yeah, it's the scavenging of the NDP ridings, as Justine was laying out. So, Katie, you want to talk a little bit about, you know, Rob mentioned Vancouver Island and sort of coming in from the north here that the Conservatives are looking to do. What's your sense of the dynamic there? Because there's a lot of buzz that the Liberals might be in play in places like Victoria, which they haven't won since David Anderson, I think, was the MP there 20-odd years ago.
Yeah, so, you know, Vancouver Island really does buck national trends. 6 of the 7 ridings right now are orange, and that includes Victoria with Laurel Collins. As she had pointed out, that riding of Victoria has been NDP for 20 years, but that could change with the Liberal candidate Will Greaves right now polling showing he's edging out a little bit, still a 2-horse race, but that's an example where Mark Carney's popularity is boosting the local candidate as opposed to the reputation of the local candidate. Also in Saanich Gulf Islands, Elizabeth May is really trying to hold on to that seat. Of course, she took it from Gary Lunn, a Conservative, in 2011, and now she's battling with a Conservative, Cathy Unstead, and being edged out a little bit by the Conservatives in that riding. So what is right now a orange and green island could very much turn blue and red.
Okay, so Justine, I just wanted your thoughts on that, because I wonder, we don't talk about the Greens too much. You know, they don't have party status. They've only got 2 seats. They got evicted from the debate. Is Elizabeth May really in trouble? Because it seems like she is the eternal cornerstone of the party in both Parliament and in the leadership mix somewhere. Well, what's your sense of what's going to happen on Vancouver Island, potentially?
Well, she moved out to Sydney in this little community in the center of the riding because the Greens had identified that as the most likely place in the country to support a Green candidate. And she was right. In fact, they have a Green provincial MLA for the region as well. So there's a strong Green contingent out there. But I went out and sat down and had coffee with some of the locals a couple of weeks ago, and really got the sense that people are reassessing their options right now. You know, obviously things can change but you know, there was a lot of talk at the time about the Trump tariffs and the threat to Canada's economy. And people were saying, I really like Elizabeth May as a local candidate. She's a great MP. But, and then, you know, people talking about either the Conservatives or the Liberals in that riding, even people that had no idea who the Liberal candidate is in Saanich and the Gulf Islands, they were just saying, I want to vote for the guy that is representing Mark Carney's party.
Right. So Rob, just on that, because where you started with talking about Vancouver Island, I have a friend who lives there who said to me that the NDP, in his assessment, is a luxury you cannot afford in a crisis, is how he described the way voters are going. And where this is an election polarizing about Prime Minister, who's the best Prime Minister, that's a tough one for Jagmeet Singh. Is that how you see it playing out here in terms of the 7 ridings on that island?
Yeah, I mean, the national polls have scared the bejesus out of the local New Democrats here. I think I can say that word on CBC.
It's a political science term, so you're good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. You have New Democrats telling me that when they go door knocking, even folks who voted for them in the past are saying, and much like your guests previous to us were saying, that folks are thinking strategically because of the national polls. They're spending a lot of time on the doors saying, and they're putting signs out on lawns now saying that the NDP is your vote to block the Conservatives in ridings like on Vancouver Island. That's the message that they are pushing. And it makes it tough because there are some races, as Katie's pointed out, where, you know, the Liberals have the potential to kind of squeak up the middle in some cases, and some races where you have blue and orange fights up in the Mid-Island to the North Island, including in Nanaimo, where folks are kind of scared. They have to be reassured to vote New Democrat. And the worry from the NDP is that if Carney's rising tide raises all boats and pulls away from them, that the Conservatives just walk away with some of those ridings based on the fear of national polls that might not translate into riding level results here on the island.
There is a real possibility of a red and blue Vancouver Island with no orange and no green, which is a remarkable thing that I didn't see coming at the beginning of this election campaign. But look, Katie, I wonder if we can just shift our focus to the Lower Mainland, the greater Vancouver area, right? You tend to get the red-orange fights in Vancouver proper, and then it moves into a bit of a red-blue as you get into the Richmond, Surrey, Steveston, these things, and then the Tri-City areas. How do you see this area playing out with the way the polls are going and with the sort of the implied weakness of the NDP in a place where they're typically pretty strong?
Well, certainly everyone's going to be looking at Burnaby Central on election night to see if Jagmeet Singh can hold on to his riding. Right now, polls are putting him in third behind the Conservatives and the Liberals, so that would be a really tough blow for him. The Metro Vancouver area is really sort of an urban area where any orange seats, the Liberals are really closely targeting. There's a star candidate, Gregor Robertson, former Vancouver mayor, who, Pierre Poilievre has name dropped specifically in many of his speeches when he's in BC, saying that he's the architect of BC's liberal drug policies that have created what he called drug dens. So clearly that that candidate has come under fire. But when Poilievre has visited some of these communities, he's really focusing on crime and drugs in these urban areas, saying that the Liberal record has created that, and so he's really capitalizing on that message. But I spoke to voters, potential voters in East Vancouver last week, and there's still many mentioning tariffs and tariffs combined with affordability as a top issue. So that is an area where voters are trying to decide the top issue for them and which party leader is best to play that out.
So Justine, there's 43 seats in British Columbia. It seems pretty, well, I mean, the Conservatives and the Liberals have the most. It seems pretty clear that's how it's going to go in some order, unless there's a dramatic change. But what's your sense of the NDP's ability to hold on to these Vancouver seats? You're seeing Don Davies putting the strategic vote sign on top of his normal sign. And you do have the leader running there. And, I know he's been elected out there, but he's kind of an Ontario politician. I mean, what's your sense of their ability to hold in the capital? Sorry, not in the capital city, in the biggest city there.
Yeah, no, clearly the New Democrats are concerned, and we had redistribution in the last before this election. So Jagmeet Singh's riding of Burnaby South, where he won twice, is no longer really his riding. It's sort of partially that, and so he's also had to kind of reestablish himself in his own riding, and we've also seen a couple of fairly high-profile New Democrats coming out and saying that people should be thinking about the Mark Carney and the Liberals in this election. One of them was former Premier Mike Harcourt, who was rebutting an endorsement from Gordon Campbell for the Pierre Poilievre, because our former premiers don't like to ever retire. But also Kathy Corrigan. Now, she was a cabinet minister in the NDP government here, but she's also married to the former mayor of Burnaby, Derek Corrigan. And so that power couple, well-connected in Burnaby. And there she was suggesting that the Liberals would be a better option this time out. So I think the New Democrats officially in British Columbia, the provincial government, and Premier Evie have endorsed the NDP out here, but I don't know that their heart is in it this time around. And so I do think the federal New Democrats are concerned.
Rob,
this is 12 seats for the NDP. So this is just BC could deliver them official standing in the House if they could hold on to these seats.
Well, Rob, that's where I wanted to go with you. I mean, it's a goat's path to official party status, right? It winds and twists and it requires wins in multiple parts of the country, but BC is what's going to put it over the top or not. I mean, what's your sense right now of how many seats it looks like the New Democrats can hold on in their politically their most important province right now?
Well, I think there's 5 in Metro Vancouver. And look, if they lose, Vancouver East, Vancouver Kingsway, and New Westminster, Jenny Kwan, Dan Davies, Peter Julian seat, they're in trouble. Like there's no orange on the island at that point, right? Like you are effectively kind of done. Those are the 3 safest New Democrat seats. So we'll see what those results are. We might not be talking about the New Democrats if they're losing those ridings. But, it's the Conservatives that are kind of coming in classic fashion because we have this rural-urban divide in British Columbia, and it ebbs and flows. They're coming in from the kind of Abbotsford, Langley, sort of Fraser Valley area. They want to come up through Surrey and the many ridings in Surrey because they did well provincially. The BC Conservatives and in the crime and addictions messaging goes well in different Surrey communities, and come around in Richmond and in some of the ethnic communities there. And so they're looking at picking up seats, pushing the Liberals back, the NDP getting squeezed in, and it is entirely possible, if those 3 ridings don't go NDP, that is a catastrophic night for that party. Yeah,
like the story of Canadian elections is typically whoever wins the suburbs wins the government, right? When the suburbs side with rural Canada, it's Conservative. When they side with urban Canada, it's Liberal. But just Rob, one last question about the 5 in Vancouver. Is Singh, Peter Julian, Don Davies, Jenny Kwan would probably be the strongest of those 5? Is Singh the 4th place in terms of his ability to hold on, or would he be 5th, do you think?
I think he's 5th. The New Democrats tell me they think Gord Johns in the Courtenay sort of Alberni area in the Mid-Island has a better chance at this point. So that's very worrying for the NDP leader and doesn't bode well for New Democrats. But look, there is always a possibility that name recognition, which is not an incumbency, which is not picked up in polling that well, helps those folks, longtime MPs, well respected in their community, kind of carry ridings that otherwise are collapsing underneath them, like kind of a rope bridge falling apart as they run to the finish line. And don't count them out.
Oh, Katie, I want to ask you one last question. We've all been following sort of the drama I think it's in Okanagan, where Mike DeYoung is running as an independent. Any insight? What do we think is going to happen there? Is it possible nomination troubles with the Conservatives could cost them a seat?
Well, I think that's an area where the Conservatives may have made a misstep. They misjudged Mike de Jong's popularity in that community. Lots of people we talked to said they're considering voting independent because they like Mike de Jong. He was their MLA for 30 years, and yet the Conservative Party said he didn't have the experience. So certainly he's putting up quite the fight, and that could be an interesting riding to watch. He's up against a Conservative candidate who's 24 years old. And so that's going to be certainly an area. Well, can Mike de Jong give the independent a seat? Yeah. So he's certainly hoping for that. And I think he's running to kind of say a little bit of a kick in the teeth back to the party for not choosing him and saying, well, I'm going to run anyways, and let's see what happens. But certainly that is an area that has typically voted Conservative. So whether he could turn that around, we'll have to see.
Yeah, there's a few ridings with similar storylines across the country I'm going to be paying attention to on Monday night. Gang, I can't wait to see what actually happens in British Columbia. It's good to see you all again. Rob Shaw, Justine Hunter, and Katie DeRosa, thanks so much.
Thanks, David.